Hello, I'm Chris Clark, President and CEO of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to our Resiliency and Recovery Roundtable and podcast. Thank you for joining us for these weekly discussions with Georgia industry leaders on how they responded to COVID-19 and how they're preparing for a much more resilient future. We've had great conversations over the last several months, and today I'm really excited to have three great Georgia leaders with us to talk about the energy sector and our utility companies here in the state of Georgia. Before we get into that, I want to remind you, if you want to review today, you can go to our YouTube channel. We also rebroadcast all of our recovery roundtables as well as our town halls on our new podcast channel. You can get that podcast, it's Georgia Chamber Podcast, on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. We've got a few upcoming events I want to give you a heads up on. One, our next roundtable will be on September 16th. And we'll be talking to some of Georgia's largest retailers. We know that section's been extraordinarily devastated during the last few months. So we're going to talk to some of the biggest companies in Georgia about how they've responded to COVID. Our Washington, D.C. fly-in this year is virtual, as we've been telling you now for the last month. I hope that you'll join us. We have some tickets left. That's September 21st to the 24th. We'll be having discussions on financial services. We have special guests from the White House. We'll be talking to Georgia's congressional delegation and also a conversation with Senator Perdue on the impact of China right now. And so really good information. We'll be doing that every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of the week for about an hour and a half. And then I do want to give you an update. So many of you have reached out to us about our annual Rural Prosperity Summit that we hold over several days in Tifton, Georgia every year. It's really one of my favorite events of the year. We are going to move forward with that as a hybrid event on October 7th. It will be a one-day event, socially distanced in Tifton. There's a limited number of in-person tickets. We'll also have virtual tickets available. Some of our speakers will be in person and many of them will be virtual, but we want to give you the opportunity to meet in Tifton and have some discussions and to network socially distanced and responsible with your mask on. So go to our website and you can get that information today. So we're going to talk with the three CEOs of Georgia's largest power companies, Mike Smith from Oglethorpe Power, Jim Fuller, President CEO of MEAG, and Paul Bowers, President CEO of Georgia Power, about, quite frankly, one of the most critical industry sectors in our state. You know, during the pandemic, these three power companies, they kept the lights on in our homes and in our hospitals. At the same time, they protected their own employees, tens of thousands of Georgia workers that were either out on in bucket trucks out on the line or in the office trying to make things happen every day. And what's remarkable, I think, and I brag about this to my peers around the country, our three utility companies not only are leaders in providing affordable, reliable energy, but they're also critical for economic development in this state and their work on the Georgia Allies, but they're also probably the best examples of corporate citizens that we've got in our state. And so I'm so appreciative of the three of you taking the time to join us today in hopes that other companies can learn from what you did during COVID, but also to learn about what the future looks like now in a post-COVID economy. So I want to jump right into this with you three guys, and I'll start with you, Paul. You know, tell us, how did Georgia Power respond during COVID? You managed our utility plants, you kept your employees safe, and you kept our lights on. Tell us about what that was like for Georgia Power.
Well, again, thanks, Chris, for having us join you today. And yes, you know, the three of us had a lot of communication because of the one project that we have going together down in Augusta. But from a broad sense, on March 13th, we declared that we were going to remote show related to our business. We started getting everyone out of the corporate offices and our regional offices, but we also had our essential workers isolated during that time. We created a platform where we separated essential workers, our operations centers, if you will, our control centers, where nobody could get into those areas. And we kept alignment to just essential work. And when you think of that, you know, there's a lot of work that we do on a daily basis, but we just went to get the lights back on if there's an outage and just essential hookups, limiting the maintenance activities on the wire side. So when you think about Georgia Power, we have 7,000 employees, plus we have another 2,000 or 3,000 that are services-related company or Southern Nuclear-related employees that were operating either our plants or operating the wires and taking calls from a standpoint of the customer service center. Now, the customer service center, we went remote, got everybody out of the corporate environment and put them in a remote basis, which ended up being a great platform for us to serve our customers. But all in all, we just went to essential work. At the end of May, we went to phase one where we said, okay, we're going to go back to maintenance related work and start increasing the span of activities for especially our line crews and our plant operations folks. And that's where our focus is still today. Phase one, no more than that. Our corporate office is still remote show. We're closing the books, doing all the accounting type work. Our IT center still has some people in the office. Our control center in our corporate office has about 400 people there, but they are essential workers that make sure the power flows across all the lines. In the middle of all this, we had several hundred people that had to help other utilities around the country during these storms. We've been up in Illinois, we've been up in New Jersey. We just had a big crew come back from Louisiana, and nobody got sick. So that's a big deal.
Paul, I'm curious, how much of that planning did you have to do after COVID hit and you realized how severe it was versus what you already had on the books? Did you just refer, hey, here's the plan, if this happens, just go to it? Or did you have to, you and your team, build this as it went?
Well, we had a resilience plan. It never had the title of pandemic, right? But we did have a resilience plan that says what happened in a cyber attack or what happens in some type of catastrophic event, but not necessarily pandemic. So we did have some of the steps necessary to isolate individuals within our business. But then when you have a pandemic overlay, when you think about the illness and the potential exposure, how do I isolate them from even other contacts and remote activities? You know, just an example, in our corporate office, our control center is essential to the operations of the network within, the state of Georgia. There's a fence around that with limited access. Nobody can go in, and they have a route to get out so they can't be seen by anybody. So, we did those type of things, but that was post-pandemic and the, result that we had to really adjust.
Right. Mike, tell us about Oglethorpe Power. How did you guys respond and what's it been like there?
A lot of very similar experiences to what Georgia Power had. I will say the planning that really prepared us was our disaster recovery planning. Regardless of what incident occurs, what happens if we can't work in the building and we have to work remotely, people have to work from home, we've got to change the way we do things. So not really understanding what type of a disaster it would be. Could it be a pandemic or something affecting the access to the building or a storm? We were ready for this. Got to start out by saying our control operations and our plant operations very similarly to Georgia Power. Those people don't have the luxury of working from home. They never have. Since this started back in March, the plant ops folks and the control center folks, day in and day out, had to go to their work site to get the function done there. Now there's a backup control center where they can operate from either or should something happen to the primary control center, but running a control operation or running the plant operations is not something that they could do from home. So those folks have been just outstanding in terms of adapting their protocol to the requirements of social distancing and staggered hours and making sure that we knew enough about COVID when it first started in March that you had to have distance, you had to stay away from people. And so we adapted very quickly in the control centers, but we didn't know how severe this was going to be in terms of the ability of people to be mobile. Those people that needed to go to the plants or needed to go to the control centers, would they be able to go back and forth from their control center to their residence? And so one of the things that we did in our plant operations was introduce the concept of sequestration. We made available at every plant that we have living quarters, temporary living quarters, and the creature comforts that we felt like people would need for a sustained stay. Plants always find a way to have a refrigerator and a microwave and things like that, but they might not necessarily have washers and dryers and other things like that. But I can tell you in March, all of our sites had washers and dryers. We wanted them to have everything that they needed in case they needed to stay at the plant. Now, luckily, we have not had to put in those efforts. They have been able to continue to travel back and forth. Headquarters, it was easy. I mean, headquarters, in March, we sent everybody home. And our disaster recovery planning prepared us very well. And I've got to give a big shout out to our IT department. I mean, everybody knew what they were supposed to do, and everybody had the necessary technology to get it done from home. And they have been doing a tremendous job of keeping us what I would call bug-free. I mean, we have had, it's rare that we don't have the ability to get into our central systems, to do the work that's necessary. You're just not hearing a lot of complaints from the folks working at home about issues with technology. So I credit our preparation there. Now, we're a little bit unique in that we are we're based in Tucker, and we're in a campus. We have a lot of offices, but we're spread out, and we don't have many floors to the campus. We're the highest floor is the 5th floor. So given the spread of the building, being in a suburban area, and by and large having people that are able to drive themselves to work individually, we in June did open back up our office. We opened it up in phases. We are in phase 1, which started June 1st. We brought back on a voluntary basis about 1/3 of our associates. And it runs the mix. It runs from the engineering through the human resources, through legal, through financial and accounting. We've got a mix of people back in, but they feel very safe. They feel that they've got the distance in place. We've done things in terms of how we have reestablished conference rooms and workspaces. And everywhere you turn, there's the wet wipes and the Clorox disinfectants. And we have a mask protocol. You have to wear a mask when you're not in your office. I would say the thing that surprised us was how long this has stayed with us, and the second wave that evolved of cases. It caused us, obviously, to delay our transition into phase 2. We have not yet tried to bring another 1/3 back in. Got a little bit of the people in phase 1 disgruntled as to, wait, you said they were going to be back within a matter of weeks. Here we are coming in, and where are they? And we had to explain the second wave of cases. But by and large, we've been able to adapt to that. On behalf of the EMCs, I would say very similar to what Paul was describing, a lot of lobby closures. They were not allowing the customer face-to-face interaction, but still getting the job done out in the field. A lot of people going to single trucks and getting around individually, not necessarily having the large-scale meetings in the morning at the EMCs before they went out, things like that. I will say, overall, we are primarily a residential server. We serve rural Georgia, and our biggest customer class is the residences. So about 67% of our load is residential. And when everybody stays home, you don't necessarily see a dramatic drop in load. So our members say their sales from COVID are really only down about 1 to 2%, just because of the fact it's their primary market that is probably seeing a little bit of an increase versus history, just because people are home and not at their place of work.
That's great, Mike. Thank you. And I think you make a good point. You've got all the member EMCs out there who have, in different locations, they can make different decisions, but you're all coordinated back up. Mm-hmm. Jim, it's, I think, similar with you. You've got all the cities out there that you're providing for. So can you tell us a little bit about what it's been like, a little bit different approach, I would imagine, having to deal with our elected officials and all their different decision making, and then making sure that you're providing for them as well?
Yeah, I think it's, very similar to what Paul and Mike have talked about. We serve 49 cities, so larger cities: Marietta, Albany, College Park, East Point, LaGrange, Noonan, Thomasville. Some very tiny cities as small as Brinson or Doe Run, South Georgia. And the cities basically maintain the distribution systems, and then MEAG handles the wholesale power transactions. And, I think the participants' community's reaction to COVID is as diverse as the geographic areas that they cover. We've kept a close tab on how they're handling the situation. It's safe to say that, larger cities have more distribution maintenance and things. And some have been hit very hard, like the city of Albany, by COVID. Other cities have closed their city halls and government buildings to the public. Some of our participant communities are having city employees work remotely. Most are working in the office. Some have restricted hours and the days they're open by appointment only in some cases. Some have no restrictions at all, but are taking appropriate preventative measures to keep the city operations running with PPE and social distancing requirements. They've come up to speed on using Zoom and WebEx for their meetings in lieu of personal meetings. And some are employing shift splits for both office and field crews. And I think the one thing that's most important for the participant communities is that the demand is down along with the revenues. Number of cities shut off or suspended shut-off notices. And there's a larger than normal amount of receivables and potential write-offs. With regards to MEAG, it's much like Oglethorpe. We closed our main offices on March 16th to all but critical operations employees and bare bones facility staff. If we have critical employees, we've split them into two groups and have them work in two separate locations, our main office and the satellite facility we own. Currently, we've got about 76% of our employees working remotely, and 18% have been splitting their time remotely versus the office. And then about 6% are field staff and have continued to conduct business on construction sites and other MEAG power facilities. We had a limited remote work policy in place for a number of years, so we had already established the connectivity and the procedures. Our information service team quickly ramped up our systems to handle the added volume. We rolled out WebEx and Zoom and pushing out apps for both our employees and their laptops. We had to update procedures for billing and accounting to electronic forms and handle some of our board meetings remotely. The main takeaway is that we're functioning largely very successfully. We have a high level of productivity, and the projects in the field continue, whether they're substation improvements or transmission improvements, or in the case of our combined cycle plant, we had a schedule outage that went on as planned in the April timeframe. You know, we had to implement some new procedures as to social distancing and cut some of the work out that wasn't absolutely necessary, but we've kept on task and got those efforts done.
So, Jim, I want to go ahead and follow up with you, and then we'll kind of go around to ask the other guys questions. But you talk about the impact on the cities themselves, right? And so what's happening in many of those cities out there. How does this affect your ability to plan kind of short-term and long-term for energy needs? Because I know that's very important in the energy sector to be able to project out what you're going to need a year from now or 5 years as you're building out the infrastructure. So how has this impacted that for y'all?
You know, early on in March, we knew that the sales were going to decline. We immediately amended our budget and cut about 5% out of the revenue requirements from the cities to offset the decline in energy sales. You know, the impact very early on, we had about 14% load losses, and as time has gone on through June and August, that declined to 5%. In August, it's in the 2 to 3% range. So we're not back to where we were a year ago this time, and this is on a weather-adjusted basis, but we're darn close. You know, long term, I think MEAG is in a very good position. We've got, in 2019, we're about 67% not emitting carbon. And that's because we have a large amount of baseload nuclear, and we have some federal preference hydro. And looking forward, you know, I think there's a lot of impetus from the large industrial commercial customers for non-emitting power. And we're looking for the first time ever to develop a solar project for the municipal communities. And we look at our long-term projections, the expansion of the system that's needing after the addition of Vogtle 3 and 4 and potential relicensing and extending the license period for Hatch 1 and 2, a lot of the need will be filled with solar because we have so much baseload needs. So, you know, we're looking in the mid 2040s to have about 90, in excess of 90% of non-emitting generation, which I think is very positive. And I think generally everybody in the state and the country is looking to higher and higher levels of non-emitting resources.
Thanks, Jim. You mentioned Plant Vogtle, and I want to turn to Paul. I think, you know, the biggest public works project in the country for the last several years has been Plant Vogtle 3 and 4. I know that you guys have continued to build. Obviously, you've had some COVID, you know, issues you got to deal with, like every other project out there. Can you give us an update and tell us where we are with 3 and 4 now and what the future looks like?
Sure. And I think, you know, when you think about what Jim just said about non-emitting resources and you think about the policies that are coming forward at energy providers across the country, you know, the aspect of having baseload nuclear in this state is a big deal. You know, Vogtle 1 and 2, Hatch 1 and 2, you know, have been providing, you know, for Georgia Power 19% of its energy. And you can look at that for Mike and Jim, probably right around that 20+% for them. Now you have 3 and 4 coming, and you think about in the context of, for the first half this year, 13% of the energy produced for Georgia Power has been coal-based, 20%, right at 20% from nuclear, and then 53% gas. And we're at 17%, you know, solar or renewables for us. You think about that and just, you know, go back to 2009 and 2007, you had 70% of the energy being produced in Georgia is coal-based. So that transition is rapidly moving forward in terms of, you know, retirement of coal-based generation in the state and it becoming less and less economic for our customers. So that's really the kind of the focus on generation planning. for Vogtle 3 and 4, yeah, when this COVID hit, we had a lot of momentum coming into 2020 in terms of the expectations of productivity and bringing these Unit 3 and Unit 4 online. As you know, our regulatory commitment date is commercial operations November of 21 for Unit 3, November 22 for Unit 4. We have right now, Unit 3 is 92.5% complete. We are scheduled to have fuel loaded. We have an aggressive schedule that says end of the year, but just plan on it being the first quarter of next year, loading fuel. What does that mean? Well, we are at the end stages of all the construction and everything else. Construction's complete. Now we're getting ready for commercial operations. And so that's how fast this is coming at us. But in the middle of all this, with the productivity focus that we had, the pandemic had a significant impact in terms of slowing the process down at the plant. But we have kept focused on trying to weather through the swings of the sine curve of up and downs on positive cases. To date, we've had 861 positives at the site. In March, we had over 9,000 employees at the site. In June, the end of May, 1st of June, we reduced the staff size by approximately 2,000 to try to get more distancing around that to ensure that we could have smaller crews, electricians and things like that work on critical areas of the plant. We stood up a medical village, so we had on-site medical services to temperature check and do all the testing for the employees that were working at the site. So all those things had an impact, but we're weathering through it. Yeah, if you give it context, we need to be able to have a 1% to meet a November 1% productivity metric or a completion rate, if you will, to make a November 21 on Unit 3. We're running at a 1.5% right now. So, we're above the November schedule in terms of productivity, but we were at one point over 2% in terms of productivity. So you see the COVID element has had an impact. But when you're all said and done, when Vogtle 3 and 4 comes online, immediately for all the energy suppliers in the state of Georgia, fuel costs will drop. So there's an impact of the lower cost energy being produced. And for us, we always said, we had gotten approval from the Public Service Commission to have this plant online, having about a 12% rate impact. We're still running in the 9.8 to 10% range. So all the things that we've done to take advantage of low interest rate environment, the trigger that Toshiba had to pay in terms of the parent guarantee, the $3.7 billion that they paid to help offset costs as well. So those things did matter. Yes, it's taken us longer to build a plant, but still it's going to be a tremendous value, just like Vogtle 1 and 2 has been for the state of Georgia.
That's great news. Mike, Jim, anything you want to add to the discussion about Vogtle?
I would like to add my thanks to Southern Nuclear Corporation. I mean, when we got hit with this pandemic in March and we didn't know what it was, the scariest thing to us as 30% of Vogtle 3 and 4 is, what is this going to do to the continuing construction out there? And my gosh, if it's really a pandemic and if it's as serious as they say, how can we possibly have 7,000 to 9,000 construction workers not develop a wave of cases where we literally overwhelm the Augusta hospitals and somebody tells us we have to shut that site down? And you can't take a site that has 7,000 to 9,000 workers and shut it down and think that you're not going to lose months and months and months of momentum out there. And as large an investment in the future of Georgia's clean energy as that site is, I just cannot give them enough credit for the foresight to get literally 5 fully staffed medical trailers set up on site, a literal medical village where people could get tested as often as they want right there on site. They don't have to leave. They don't have to go get in line at some facility off-site in their community. They can do it on site. And yeah, we've had collectively over 800 cases out there, but I think we never have had more than at any time active cases in the 120, 150 range. And even today, I think we're down, the latest report I saw was we're down to a net 45, net 50 case. So I just give them all the credit in the world for keeping the momentum going at the site. And through COVID, that construction project has carried on. And I credit our contractor out there.
Hey, Chris, let me add on to what Mike says. So for everybody that's listening in, understand you're looking at 3 of the owners. We also have the city of Dalton that owns a portion of plant Vogtle 3 and 4. Southern Nuclear is our operator. They operate the plants on behalf of the owners. They became the general contractor when Westinghouse went bankrupt and took over the site. Vogtle is their subcontractor, if you will, to actually do the construction work on behalf of us, the owners. So in context, Southern Nuclear is the focal point for us to get this work done. And like Mike, they've done a great job just to keeping a focus and ensuring that we had some productivity even through some of the peaks. And when you talk about having positive tests, whenever one positive test happens, you isolate and quarantine groups of workers. So when you have one, you set aside for 2 weeks upwards to hundreds of people off the site where they can't work and ensure that they're not getting infected. But that's all at the direction of that medical village and the medical staff there doing all that.
That's incredibly impressive, and I had not heard that story before. I got one more substantive question, Mike, I want to ask you, and then I want to wrap up with a quick question to all 3 of you. But Mike, we talked a little bit about the energy mix. What does that look like? I mean, Oglethorpe's been a leader in green energy here for years and years and years. You guys have been talking about solar for so long. Vogtle's coming online. You've got natural gas that's so strong. What does that mix look like for Oglethorpe and your members going forward?
Right now, in terms of our energy sales, Paul was a little bit low on our nuclear. We are actually currently about 40% of our energy sales comes from the nuclear units. 50% comes from our natural gas fleet, not surprisingly, given where natural gas prices are today. We are running our natural gas assets hard. Things that you typically just peak run are running a lot more than we ever envisioned, just given where economics of natural gas are. So 50% natural gas, 40% is our zero carbon-based nuclear. About 5% comes from solar and hydro, and then 5% from coal. Only 5% of our current energy sales are coming from coal. Now that's great in terms of the environment and our carbon emissions, but in terms of the economics of the coal plants, it also says something about that. And so we are looking at, you talk about short-term, long-term. Long-term, we are fans of diversification. We need to have a lot of different kinds of assets in our portfolio. And you cannot put all of your eggs in one basket. You don't know where natural gas pricing is going to go. I can tell you what we don't want to be today. We don't want to be California. Look at California. They shut down all the coal plants, and then they said, okay, now let's get rid of the nuclear, let's get rid of the natural gas. We've got enough wind, we've got enough solar, we've got a few peaking assets, and when we don't have enough coming from our renewables, we'll import in from other states around us. Well, guess what? Here comes the heat wave. And here comes the end of the day, and the sun is going down, and the wind is not blowing the way it was, but it's still 100 degrees. And they go to the states next to them and say, we'd like to continue to import in power. And the states say, no, thank you. We're in the same heat wave you're in. We need that power here. So you've got the governor and the mayors of Los Angeles and other cities talking about, you know, forced cutbacks and rolling brownouts, and, you know, people getting emails at 3 o'clock in the afternoon telling them to turn off all of their appliances and get ready for a shortage of power. So the assets that we have, the coal assets, the natural gas assets, they're there for resiliency. They're there because, as you said, the lights don't go out in Georgia, and we need to keep it that way. And we need to all reduce our carbon footprint. We have been doing the same thing that MEAG and Georgia Power have. We've all experienced similar reductions in our carbon rates coming from the investments in solar and nuclear and things like that. But I can tell you there's a benefit to portfolio diversity, and it comes, excellent example right now, just we don't want to be California.
Well, I think that's probably why all of your economic development teams are in California right now, calling on all those companies. So we'll keep that up. One last question for all of you, and Jim, I'll start with you. I mean, you've all adjusted your operations dramatically to care for your customers, to care for your employees through all this. Is there one lesson learned or one thing that you've done during COVID that you're going to continue to take forward? We've heard some companies talk about, you know, they'll continue to have flexible work hours, or what is it, that big takeaway that you've gone, we can do this, we've done it better during COVID or differently, let's continue this going forward. And so, Jim, I'll start with you.
You know, I guess the one thing is that the transition has been easier than I ever anticipated from the remote working. Like, we basically are getting everything that we need to get done. It's probably a little bit more challenging for some of the employees, especially if they've got school-age children or they're caring for parents and things. And you know, the technology works very well. I think we're hearing a resounding ask from the employees where they'd like to have expanded use of teleworking. And in some areas that makes perfect sense. In others, it's more difficult, especially being operational utility and having people in the field. Overall, it's been successful, and we've kept up with the productivity, kind of the interpersonal action and the sense of camaraderie and teamwork. It's more difficult if you're doing everything by teleconference and things. So I think that's the biggest thing that we're going to have to evaluate is, once COVID has been solved either through vaccine or just burning out, really what's the workforce going to look like, and how much of that will be in person in the office. And it's under study. We haven't concluded on exactly where we're going to come out on that.
Yeah. Mike, what about you guys at Oglethorpe?
Come on mute. Okay. A little bit somewhat different slant. I am a fan of trying to get people back into the office. I believe there is an aspect of human resources development that we are missing by trying to do all of this over Zoom and over teleconferences and things like that. You do not get the mentoring of your younger associates. There was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal in the last week of July that had the theme of a short-term fix is not a long-term solution, and that people obviously immediately had to go to the teleworking and by and large working from home. But the people that jumped out and said, this is the future of how we're going to do business, have had time to reflect that really the ones who may feel like they're benefiting the most, the millennials, are probably suffering the worst. They're not learning, they're not developing the way they could if they had that human-to-human interaction in the office, developing the relationships, the mentoring, the learning of the acronyms, the learning of the business from just, the informal conversations have to happen. So we're anxious. We're not going to rush it, but we're very anxious to get people back in as quickly as we can because we miss the teamwork, the interactions, things like that. Now, obviously, we're going to be a little bit more flexible in the future with the occasional telecommuting, but the companies like Twitchy and others that came out and said we may never get back in the office ever, you can put me on the other side of that scale. I don't buy that.
Got it. Paul, what about you and Georgia Power?
Well, I think there's a mixture between Jim and Mike. I agree with Mike about the development of individuals, but I think, when you think about some of the efficiencies that you can't have in a remote show, call center type activities, those type things, I think that shows that you can do things differently, and there's efficiencies associated with that. However, Mike's right, the development of individuals is critical to, the intellectual capacity of the team and the creativity of the team. And, the whole aspect of trying to interact and get the best solutions is done by that informal conversation that occurs in the offices. So, our teams are right now looking at the future of our structure in terms of how do we staff and how much office space, that kind of thing. And I think I'm going down a path where the offices become like a hotel, where there's 3 days a week or 2 days a week where people are actually in the office, to do their work, not a desk, right? Everybody's got their own little offices or own cubicle or whatever, but have it more free flow where you have that interaction, come in for 2 or 3 days and then go back out. I think there is going to be an opportunity for us to reduce the overall space requirements of our operations. And you think about, we got Georgia Power, we got Southern Company Gas, Atlanta Gas Light right here. We have our telecom, network folks. So there's some things that we can consolidate probably in that regard. And we're in the middle of doing micro battles as, we go through all this stuff where our teams are still doing it through Zoom, but thinking through, that interaction. But Mike hits the point that you still have to develop people for the future. And the only way you do that is the personal touch. And how do you force that to happen?
Well, listen, that's all great feedback and input. And I just, on behalf of the business community of the state, I want to thank you guys for keeping the lights on, keeping us all safe, being able to power up all of our remote home workstations, as well as all of our shopping and everything else and hospitals that you've made happen. Your teams have been just incredible through all of this. And we couldn't ask for better power providers in the state and better corporate citizens. So thank you guys